My Aunt Bonnie and Cousin Jedediah lived far out in the country. The first time I'd ever stayed overnight was a long time coming. For some reason, despite Jed and my closeness, there was always a tug and pull between our families. For years I wanted to sleep over, and they denied it. We were adolescents now, and after what happened, I can see why they wanted us to mature a bit. It was early winter. We played baseball and shot BB guns in the yard all day, ate dinner, and asked to go outside just a little longer. Bonnie demanded we be in before dark, an understandable demand from a protective parent. But then Jed said something strange. "Stay with me. Don't go near the woods." "Why?" I asked. "Wolves," his dad interrupted. Good enough for me. Something about my uncle's voice, however, when he said wolves, sounded more like an excuse than a real reason. I'd never seen a wolf in Pennsylvania. We snuck to the tree line and just threw rocks as far as we could, listening for them to splash in the creek. If it did, that meant one of us had a hell of a throw. We both wanted to become MLB pitchers. We adhered to the rules, went inside at dusk, and slept through the night, though I did wake up at one point to hear what sounded like laughter outside. The noise went in and out, and I never gave it a second thought. Probably neighbors. I didn't think of it again until we left and drove down the road leading away from the house. I asked my grandma where the neighbor's house was. They own 200 acres on all sides. There aren't neighbors for at least a mile in every direction. I felt momentarily uneasy, but it passed. My Aunt Bonnie was much more lenient the next visit, which was the following weekend. Just be in before dark. We know. Without question, she emphatically stated. We had 2 hours until dark, when suddenly a warm front rolled in, and an ever-thickening fog came with it. "You boys stay in the yard," Uncle Rick shouted authoritatively. You don't question Uncle Rick, a man who regularly handled venomous rattlesnakes with his bare hands. We were playing baseball, and as the formless smog continued to drift across the state, the sound of blaring warning sirens wailed from afar, incrementally increasing in decibel level up and back down in an eerie, howling sort of tone. "It's the no-drive siren," Jed explained. "Our fogs can be dangerous out here. We still could see within reasonable distances around us." Aunt Bonnie called for us to come in, when Jed asked for one last pitch. I threw the ball, and he slugged it far over my head and into the woods. I hadn't thought about the no-woods rule since last time. I guess they assumed we'd comply. We intended to, but my uncalculated instinctual reaction was to follow the ball, and inadvertently, I sprinted beyond the tree line and into the woods, probably 50 yards in retrospect. The last thing I heard Jed cry out was no. Night was falling, and I'd run so far into the woods I couldn't see which direction was which as the fog grew dense and uniform. My line of sight dwindled to 10 or 15 feet on all sides. "Greg!" Jedediah shouted, but I was busy looking for my new ball, which I swore hit the dry, crunching leaves not too far from me. When I realized I'd never find it, a bothersome reality set in amidst the cacophonous siren and screams for my name. "Greg!" Jed shouted once again, clearly emanating from my 6 o'clock, but as I paced in his direction, once again, my name was shouted, from the opposite direction, deeper into the woods. The only thing which caused a chill to run through my blood was that the voice coming from the brush sounded like a little girl. Just as the trees began to crack and settle into the ever-shifting winds, I got a dreadful feeling. "Hello," I cried out, only the sound of cackling, high up into the trees and far away. "Hello," I screamed, my tone infused with nervous distress, and then a rustling, like leaves dragged upon by something, coming at me from just ahead, getting closer and closer, and then, spoken delicately like a young child, I heard, "Greg?" A gentle question, followed by a surreal and horrifying vision. 2 bare feet attached to bare legs, hovering just above the ground, toes dragging against the forest floor. Then, the sudden thumping of footsteps sprinting at me attached to a bright light. I was instantly pulled within human strength by a tight grip. It was Uncle Rick. "Go back home," he shouted angrily over my head. I was swept away, Uncle Rick urging me to run and not let go of his hand. We broke through the trees and barreled forward through the porch door, and then into the house in a blur. He locked the door frantically. I didn't even know what I saw. You don't know what's in those woods? He yelled as he shakily fastened the lock and hatch. Turn off the lights. This was the reason, I assumed, for the no woods, no night rule. I wasn't even sure of what I really saw. Nobody got angry. I didn't even get yelled at. Just told to go to our room and get to bed. Aunt Bonnie had an expression not of disappointment, but of concern. Jedediah looked frightened. We didn't say anything to each other. He went to bed and I got in my sleeping bag on Jed's floor. I couldn't fall asleep, only ponder what it was I'd actually seen in those woods. It got quiet for a while, but then I heard it. The same thing from last time. Laughter, outside, only it sounded like it was closer, in the yard. It sounded like children were chasing each other in circles around the house. It got silent, eventually. It would be a while before I got drowsy, maybe an hour. And that's when I heard a sound at Jed's window. Delicate scratches, like fingernails. Jed spoke out quietly, "Don't pay attention to it. It will go away." I'm not sure what was more unsettling. The fact that Jed had been lying awake in scared silence for over an hour, or the fact that the tapping on the window sounded like a person trying to get our attention. Our room was on the second floor. The next day, on the way home, I began to tell my grandma what had happened, until she stopped me. We drove on in uncomfortable silence as I felt scolded for several miles, and then I finally asked, "What was it? Last night?" She took a puff of her cigarette and exhaled, blowing it out the cracked window. There are things around those woods that we don't understand. The house belongs to your family, but the forest will always belong to them. If they call your name, never answer.